Member Simmons, member from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, referendums have a long history throughout this country and our province. Some of the biggest questions facing our nation have been determined by referring the matter to a referendum, such as the conscription crisis of 1942, the referendum and repeal of prohibition, and the Charlottetown Accord. Referendums are a necessary tool that complements our democracy and empowers citizens by giving them the opportunity to influence public policies directly. We've also seen referenda used recently in Ontario for both de-amalgamation and proportional representation. But referenda are always at the prerogative of the government, not at the behest of the people. If all governments were responsive and respectful of people, there would never be a need for either democracy or referenda. However, sometimes majority governments attempt to steamroll legislation through and in the process stifle public opinion and influence. This has become all too familiar here in our Assembly. The sale of Hydro One is but the most recent example. Today I'll be introducing my private member's bill, the Referendum Act, which will allow people of Ontario to trigger a referendum via a petition and mandating government to hold a referendum on these important policies. Referenda would be a great step forward in empowering citizens and enhancing our democracy here in Ontario, and I encourage all members to support the Referendum Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Introduction of bills. Member from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Citizen-Initiated Referenda to Require the Introduction of Legislation, and that be read for the first time.
Mr. Hillier moves the leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Citizen-Initiated Referenda to require the introduction of legislation, and it now be read for the first time. Is the pleasure to House the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Citizen-Initiated Referenda to require the introduction of legislation. First reading of the bill, Premier Lecture de Pruja de Lois.
The member for a short statement.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I won't read the complete explanatory note, but I will read from it. This bill, the Referendum Act 2015, enacts a new act that provides a process by which a person who is eligible to vote in an election of members of the Legislative Assembly, called a registered voter in the Act, can initiate a province-wide referendum on a question that falls within the constitutional competence of the Assembly. A registered voter can apply to the Chief Electoral Officer at any time for the issuance of a petition, except if the officer has previously issued a petition with respect to that question that, in the officer's opinion, is of the same manner. A proponent of a petition has 60 days to return the petition to the Chief Electoral Officer with the signatures of persons who, on the day of the issuance of the petition, are registered voters and who represent, for at least 10 electoral districts, at least 25% of the total number of registered voters who voted in the previous election. In that case, a writ is issued requiring a referendum be held on the referendum question. If at least 50% of the valid referendum ballots cast in a referendum indicate a yes answer to the question, the government is then required to take steps as soon as reasonably possible to implement the result. Those steps consist of ensuring that the Lieutenant Governor in Council or a member of the Council makes a regulation if it's legally possible to implement or otherwise introduce legislation. Thank you very much.